What's up, everybody, and welcome back to TarHeelIllustrated.com, or, of course, we are watching on our YouTube channel as well. I'm THI staff writer Jacob Turner, and joining me, as he always does, for yet another episode of the UNC Football Show, our very own publisher, Andrew Jones. And AJ, we got an exciting show ahead towards the end. As we always do, we'll be previewing North Carolina's matchup this weekend. That one's against the Hokies. Virginia Tech, 3:30 p.m. kickoff in Kenan Stadium. That game will be on the ACC network. Carolina currently an 8.5-point favorite over the Hokies, and I'm sure that line will change before Saturday. So towards the end, we're going to be focusing on that matchup, diving a little bit deeper into it. But before that, AJ, kind of like following the typical format we do on the show, I want to hit on some of the weekday or game week storylines going back to Monday. And I think for me, there's only one place we can start. And I want to go back to the Monday press conferences. For us and for Carolina fans, this is a big topic of conversation, especially early in the week, was just how fiery Mack Brown was in his typical Monday press conference. And I tweeted it out, I believe, on Monday. It really wasn't a surprise to me when you look at what happened against Notre Dame. You look at how the defense has performed this season, which we'll hit on a little bit and kind of tie into this as well. Not a surprise, and I kind of expected Mack Brown to be fired up. Maybe not as much as he was and give us some of the intel that he did. But firing Mack Brown was a theme on Monday. And like I said, I think it's something we need to hit on. So you were there in person. You were there obviously asking questions and kind of got to not only talk to Mack, but talk to the other coordinators as well. What was your kind of takeaway from the press conference and some of the things that were said? Because like I said, that's the most fired up I've seen Mack Brown, in a while. And for lack of a better word, it seems like he was pissed off.
I asked him if he was angry, and he said he never gets angry.
He said he was passionate, which I was like,
passionate. I think frustration and passion, when you mix those two together, those two potions together, they can reflect anger.
Yeah, for sure.
And he would be justified to be angry and highly disappointed and frustrated and ticked off and bewildered and concerned and all those things, because the defense has been largely really bad this year. And Saturday was a barometer game. It was a barometer game for a lot of things. And I think we have to be fair, and we'll discuss this a little bit more as we get into this, but I don't want people to make a full judgment on the program versus Notre Dame. That's kind of stupid. That's like judging Notre Dame's basketball program and because of how it does in one game versus North Carolina in basketball. It wouldn't make sense. So it shouldn't apply. That same thing applies to football. But it wasn't like new things popped up in this game as a problem. They've had issues across the board defensively throughout. We saw some symptoms against FAMU, and we saw everything, all the guts just pour out open onto the floor again, or field rather, against Appalachian State. We saw too much of that against Georgia State, and then everything was there against Notre Dame as well. So I believe that there's a tremendous level of concern by Mack and the coaching staff. And I think that there are confidence issues on the defense. There are frustration issues on the defense. And as a result, focus has been a challenge. Anybody in life, if you're losing confidence in something and you're frustrated about that very same thing, sit down and try to focus on it. It's not as easy. Most people can relate to that. So these kids are being asked to do that in front of large fan bases and at games, and for a fan base that has been very quick to jump on them and criticize their performances through social media and everything else, which is, I think, why Mack asked the fans to sort of lay off a little bit. I understand why he did that, but I also know it's futile. People are going to lash out at him for saying that. So there's a lot wrong defensively. And I think a lot of this stuff is fixable over the course of the next 8 games, but there has to be a trigger point. And I've been talking trigger points a lot this year about A, what was wrong, and now B, how do you get it right? Everything had a trigger point about what's been wrong. Every level, every nuance of the defense has been bad. So they have to get things right. And we can discuss down the road here in this podcast about where that begins with. But I think what we saw was Mack's passion and frustration about where things are. 4 games in. And yeah, they don't have Notre Dame again on the schedule, but you don't want to see your team roll out there in the field and have so many things exposed. And we talked to him Wednesday morning after practice. He said, look, we've been exposed. Everything about us is out there. And I wrote a column that may have run by the time we run this podcast, but it says just that. All their wards, they know where every ward is. And so do their opponents. So they have to fix these things one at a time. Mm-hmm. One at a time, fix them, see if they can get better. I think they have a chance to get healthy over the next month from a focus standpoint, a confidence standpoint, and for then obviously a performance standpoint before the back end of the schedule. That's very tough. It's a lot tougher than what the next month is. So there's a lot of stuff going on here. We're going to have a long podcast, I think, because there's a lot of things to hit on. We can directly pinpoint some stuff and go from there as well. But you asked me about Mac's passion. I think his passion reflects a lot of that stuff. I think he's concerned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't think there's any doubt about it.
And rightfully so.
Yeah, like I said, I don't think there's any doubt about it because it's been a theme for this team this season. It's not like, oh, they just, play bad against a struggling Notre Dame offense. No, they've struggled on defense the whole year, through 4 games. So, and even going back to last year, I think that's where a lot of frustrations from fans come from. It's not like it's just been a bad defense this year. Carolina's a program. I know guys and people that have been, and I've talked to them about this, who've been going to Carolina football games for 20 years. And it's like, there's the stereotypes that are not necessarily about Carolina offensively, but there's these stereotypes that have existed for a long time about Carolina defensively and the struggles that it seems like this program is, for the most part, always had on the defensive side of the ball, not only under Mac Brown, under Larry Fedora, and even going back, Butch Davis and John Bunting. I know Butch had some better defenses when he was here, but it's something that isn't just something like a Mac Brown issue. It's something that's culminated in Carolina fans for a long time. And when you dive into the defense a little bit more, AJ, they rank 126 nationally out of 131 teams in total defense this year, allowing 495.2 yards per game through 4 games. You look at some of the opponents they've played, you expect them to be about a lot better than that. Not only that, when you look at the talent on the defense, you look at the guys that are being put out there. I know Max kind of hit about, a lot of our talent is younger, maybe not out there yet, but still there's a lot of talent on the defense. They shouldn't be the second worst defense in Power 5 and the worst defense in the ACC. It should be better than that. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. So listening to Mac Brown's press conference on Monday, and this is kind of what I want to talk to you about, he mentioned disconnect on defense. And I don't think that's a revelation to anybody. If you're statistically as bad as North Carolina is on defense, there's obviously a disconnect somewhere. And I know he kind of backtracked on it when some more questions were asked about it. But you mentioned it off camera. Gene Chizik hit on it too, a disconnect. A few minutes after Mac was on.
He used that word.
He used that word. So obviously, whatever way you want to put it, like I said, the coaches are kind of saying it, might be backtracking a little bit, but that's the word that they're using. But also, like I mentioned, when you look at how statistically bad North Carolina is, of course there's a disconnect on defense. That's not a revelation to anybody. So, AJ, from your opinion and from what you've seen this year, what is that disconnect? Where does that disconnect lie? And is that a disconnect that can be fixed, or is this just something that 4 games in might be the theme for this team this season?
Well, if it's the theme for the season, then things are really going to get ugly the next.
Because it was an issue last year too, as well. That's the reason I'm kind of like, is this
last year? Okay, they are separate. They're separate because last year the kids were losing faith in the system.
Yeah,
they were losing faith in the scheme, and I think there are a lot of things at play here, and so much of this is mental. Psychological. We've talked about that before. Yeah. We do that Twitter space every Monday night. We've talked the last 2 weeks about last week a lot about psychological and mental, but it's totally legit. It's not an excuse. People who have played sports at a fairly competitive level will understand that. But they bring in Gene. Gene's a savior, right? The guy, they lost faith in the guy that was there before, Jay Bateman.
You're supposed to come in and fix it. Yeah.
Gene, as a defensive mind, is almost legendary in the sport. Okay. They bring him in. He's saying everything that they want to hear. He's instilling discipline, eyes straight ahead, feet on the floor, cell phones in your pocket, right? We're going to simplify everything. So the kid's like, now all that Bateman crap where they would call 2 plays and every 15 people on the field communicating, even though only 11 were allowed on the field, that kind of stuff. Okay, we can breathe easy. He's going to make this so much easier for us because we're really talented and now we're going to play like our talent. And it hasn't happened. So you start to doubt a lot of things. This is human nature now, right? And the kids individually are making mistakes. So they start to lose confidence. Their position groups are making mistakes. So they start to lose trust in one another. And collectively as a defense, they're making mistakes and giving up huge plays and getting gassed. And they start to turn on each other a little bit, or their way of trying to motivate is maybe not a great way to try to motivate. So we've seen all these things play out where the frustrations are hampering them. The frustrations and lack of confidence is affecting the focus. So I've had goodness knows how many people either on our message board or reach out to me personally and say, they're not trying. They're selfish. They're not trying. They don't care. That's not true. When your focus is an issue, you're going to be slow to react. You're not going to pick up on everything in pre-snap you need to pick up. You're not always going to win every rep in a mano-a-mano situation. It snowballs into something worse and it gets out of control. That is how this group allowed 6 touchdowns in one quarter to App. That's how this group allowed 205 yards and 10 first downs in the third quarter to a horrific offensive team at Georgia State. That's how this group allowed 13 first downs in consecutive quarters to Notre Dame. The snowball effect. And when that happens, they can't pull themselves out of it. And they have not had the kind of leadership on defense that they want yet. And part of it's because their leaders are frustrated and their leaders are doubting certain things. So it's hard for them as highly frustrated guys to lead. So a lot of these things have manifested themselves into what we see when opponents basically run scripted offense against them. When you know you're supposed to check Michael Mayer when he cuts across the middle, but there's a block that enters in at the wrong time for a split second that screws up your assignment control, whether it's in coverage, whether it's in making your fits in the run game. With Notre Dame, they told us before Notre Dame, a lot of teams threw a lot of eye candy at them and it affected them in pre-snap. And against Notre Dame, they're biting on the play action stuff. One reason they're biting is because they're getting whipped at the line of scrimmage and the runs are working. Notre Dame had 18 runs of 7 or more yards. When that happens, there's almost, I won't want to say a gun-shy mentality, but, oh my gosh, they're going to run that number 7 again at us.
Yeah.
And you go to play number 7, but instead Pine's rolling out and the tight end's wide open, or there's a wheel route wide open. That's what happens. So it's not trying. It's just a lot of other mental mess that enters into the picture, and it adds to itself. It grows. It mushrooms and it gets out of control. That's why I have asked Mac and I have asked Gene at separate times, is there a feeling of helplessness at times? And they're never going to say yes, but I would imagine if I were a coach and the guys are in the right calls and they're just not getting it done because you could see the mushroom effect taking, the snowball effect mounting. There's not much they could do to get out the field. They are not mature enough yet on defense across the board where they have a couple of guys that say, screw this. I got to make a play. I'm going to get it right. I'm going to be the guy that changes the disposition here. So what we've seen a couple of times in the last 2 games is where guys barking at other guys who maybe, whose confidence might be shaken a little bit more, they react. They lash out and they react. That's a tough thing to coach. And that's and maybe Virginia Tech is the perfect tonic for this defense because they've been anemic offensively. And this club needs some confidence. They need reasons to go back to the sideline and say, good job, man. But they haven't done that a lot. So after 4 games, I don't care how talented you are. I don't care how smart you are. I don't care how well coached you are. When that stuff's going on, it's very difficult to climb out of without some kind of seismic thing happening. Maybe the seismic thing is an anemic offense coming in. Maybe it's a storm, whatever it is. Get off the field, 3 and outs, force punts, get those stats down and feel good about yourself. And that's how stuff turns around. It's like that with us in real life. It's like that with these kids as football players. And I'm not making excuses. I'm just explaining what has happened. And I could tell you for a fact, these are the trigger points. And these are the trigger points the staff has to deal with. It's not, boy, Gene Chizik doesn't know a damn thing about defense anymore. He should be fired because he can't coach. He's putting him in the wrong stuff. People say blitz more. Well, they blitzed 11 times and they got to the quarterback once. That's not a good ratio. Plus, when you blitz, you're leaving corners wide open. And if your two corners are having confidence issues and they're struggling with their assignments, you don't really want to leave them alone on an island too much. That doesn't really play to their strengths right now. So the staff is a little hamstrung with a lot of the things they need to do to try to jar things. So, okay, let's say just have a series where you just blitz every down to see if you could change the course of things, maybe force a turnover. This team has 3 forced turnovers so far. So they haven't had those pick-me-ups. Maybe you do something to get a pick-me-up. Maybe you go into straight man coverage. Maybe you go straight zone. Maybe you play dime coverage all the time, which they did a lot with Will Hardy on the field the other day. But then you got to pull a linebacker off the field. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of questions, and they have worked through these things. They have discussed moving some guys around. So we can get into a lot of stuff. I know I'm getting long-winded here, Jacob, and I know you have a lot of questions, but I really think people need to understand that it is a lot more than just Gene Chizik sucks, Dre Bly can't coach, Tim Cross can't coach, and these kids aren't trying. It is far different than that, and it's, I think, far more complex than that.
I want to hit on what you said about individual guys going out there and just making plays, so putting your foot down and saying, look, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm going to go out here and make something happen, because I know the reason I want to hit on that is because I know it's true. I think it's true, but B, it's because it's something that I've had a few conversations with Carolina fans, whether it be on Twitter or in person, that I just know personally. And that's been one of the criticisms of, I've heard it so many times, like, well, you go and watch these other defenses in the ACC around the country, and you got guys that make plays when it matters. And that's something that has been a big criticism from fans towards this defense, not even just this year, but going back 2 years previous, and you're going way back at just some of the defenses Carolina's had over the last 10 years in particular that has been really poor at times, is when a play is needed to be made, nobody makes it. That's a big frustration. You hit on confidence. Obviously, confidence has to be an issue. You can't get gashed on defense like Carolina has and just, be feeling rosy about yourself. That confidence has to be an issue. You can watch this defense play and say, yeah, there looks like a few guys out there that just don't have the confidence maybe that they should have, expected to have, or could have if this defense was clicking, not on all cylinders, but just on a few cylinders. So and like you said, I don't like when people just say, well, he can't coach anymore. I agree with you 100% on that. That's just a very lazy way of looking at stuff. And I get why fans do it, but I think it's just a lazy way.
Very lazy.
Yeah. It's not that simple. To me, confidence is a big issue with this defense. Now, like you said, okay, confidence is an issue. As a coaching staff, how do we fix that? Do we switch something up? Do we do this? Do we do that? But to me, it sounds like it's not that simple, because it's not like you just got a few people that are maybe low on confidence. It sounds like across the board, you've got different kind of issues and different kind of confidence issues where, okay, we can do this to fix that, but then this is now going to be a problem. We could fix that by doing this, but like you said with Will Hardy, now we got to take a linebacker off the field. There's so many different moving parts that go into trying to figure this out. But to me, like I said, I think confidence has to be a big, big factor in that. What's going to fix the confidence is this defense playing better, making stops, making plays, forcing turnovers, holding a team to 24 points, 20 points. That's what's going to fix this going forward. It's not like you can just do it in one game. So, AJ, when you look at that confidence issue and you look at all the moving parts that go with it, how big of a issue do you think confidence is right now? And how big of an issue do you think it is in trying to fix that? Because like I said, you can't just snap your fingers and get everybody confidence. Something that has to be instilled over time. So I think that is a big, big issue, not only for Carolina, but I think it's also a big concern amongst Carolina fans when they look at the product that's being put out on the defense at this, very moment, 4 games in.
I would imagine everybody listening to this or watching this has been an academic student at one point in their life, and they had something that they were studying either for a test or a project, and it was tough. Maybe it was something they weren't getting, whether it was math or it was science, or maybe they're not wired historically and they're not connecting the dots of the Reconstruction era after the Civil War or something like that, right? Mm-hmm. And you're told, hey, you know what, just get up and walk away. Go do something else. Go take the dog for a walk, do the dishes, come back and kind of reset a little bit. I think the players only meeting Sunday that was called for by the players. It kind of started on their little Twitter group, chat group, or not Twitter, texting chat group. Mm-hmm. They kind of got that going. They organized, they did it, didn't even tell the coaches. I think that was that kind of moment. So does that affect this week? Well, they've had good practices. they've been making plays. There have been interceptions in practice this week. Tony Grimes has had a really good week of practice. Some guys had words. They said a lot of stuff. Tony, I'm sure, was one of the guys because he's struggled a little bit. They all, I'm sure, at some point. Ray Wahasek even said some of the guys on the team on defense that haven't gotten in the game yet, but are sitting there on the sidelines, standing there on the sidelines watching games, they shared input as well because what they see. So I think that that's a healthy thing. Maybe that's their way of walking the dog or doing the dishes and then going back to the grind, right? That can be helpful. I asked Mac Wednesday, I said, in your experiences, have you often seen an immediate effect of player-only meetings actually helping a team? And he said, yes, he sees it a lot. So sometimes you need someone else to tell you that you're not doing this right or not doing that right in a different environment than what you're used to. If it's Cedric Gray getting on a guy on the field during a game, maybe it's different if it's Cedric or somebody else, or Noah Taylor, or if it's Gio Biggers, or if it's, Miles Murphy saying it in a more controlled environment where it's just you guys. Sometimes guys hear something from the coach so much they stop hearing it. Mm-hmm. I remember I talked to a Maryland basketball player one time, under Gary Williams, and people that know basketball remember Gary used to turn around and just complain and moan and gripe to the guys on the bench. Mm-hmm. And one of the guys who didn't play much his first 2 years, but played later, one time said, you know what, after about midway through my freshman year, I didn't even hear it anymore. I didn't even know coach was complaining about stuff. So I think sometimes kids get like that. So to hear it from somebody different, to receive it in an environment where you just can't just screw it on the field and you got to go do a next play where it has to seek in, that can be very helpful. And I think that they believe that that's possible this week. The other thing here too that people need to understand is some of these guys are hurt. Yeah. They're not going to put injury stuff out there about everybody. And I know this, and this is very, very, very well sourced. A couple of the guys on the defensive line have been banged up. And the kinds of injuries, lower body injuries that they have really affected their ability to get off the snap and get into the snap, get into the play as effectively, as quickly, and with the kind of strength and push, and then using their leverage the way that they would be able to if they're healthy. This is not an excuse, but it's a fact. And I think where they are right now, and there's some other guys too, they're very thin at linebacker. They've got some issues at corner. That there comes a point where when things aren't going very well, a lot of fans are like, well, just put such and such in. But here's what happens with coaches. Coaches are like, hey, I see them every day at practice. And I know that the guys that we're putting on the field who are struggling are better than the one. I trust them more than the ones who are not in the game right now. So why would I take a guy I don't trust as much and put him in for a guy who's already struggling? He's going to struggle more. Mm-hmm. So they kind of deal with that. And unlike in basketball, where Roy Williams can sub in 5 guys to the starters because he's pissed 2 minutes into the second half, in football, if you do something like that, you give up a 50-yard touchdown the first play, that can cost you a game. Usually a couple minutes in a basketball game, they're not going to cost you that game. Mm-hmm. But in football, it's different. And coaches are less apt to use the bench as a motivator in football as they do in basketball. They have identified the guys they think need to be on the field, and they're going to run with them. They're the dudes they're going to battle with, and they're going to roll with them. I know that there have been some times where they've been putting a couple of guys on the field to send messages to other players. They've done that. Just last weekend they did it. People could probably figure out who some of those guys are. But that's not something you could do across the board. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot at play here. But, the slogan when Mac came back was be the one. Right now, they need someone to be the one. Mm-hmm. They need a play to flip things. They need the defense to do something that helps them win. There's a reason the staff, Mac, really pushed hard the play the defense made at the end of the App State game. The fourth quarter, 58 yards and no points to Georgia State. There's a reason he's pushed that, because he's trying to give them positive things to absorb, to indulge on, to get them more in the right mind. There's a lot of psychology stuff that goes into coaching and being a player. And I think right now, the staff's job is greater on that front than it is on the X's and O's front.
Yeah, no doubt about it. AJ, I'm gonna shout out our sponsor here in a second. I want to ask you one last thing before we kind of move on to the preview. I want to hit on leadership on for the whole team, really, but defensive side of the ball. I know we've hit on it a little bit, but I want to kind of build off that player-led meeting you talked about that happened on Sunday. I've been down on the field a few times this year, and I think there is leadership on the defensive side of the ball in ways, but I don't necessarily know if it's a positive leadership. And what I mean by that is I'm going to give a personal story here. I played soccer at a high level growing up, and in high school soccer in particular. I had a guy on my team who I was the captain on our high school team for 2 years, excuse me. But I had a guy on my team that was kind of like a captain every once in a while. And he had a big mouth. He was a talkative guy. The issue with that was, though, is everything that came out of his mouth was negative. And to him, he was a leader, right? To him, he was vocal. He was telling guys where to be and what they needed to do. But the delivery wasn't right. It made you say, okay, you're trying to do your job on the field, but you got a guy in your left ear that for, 85 of the 90 minutes you're out there is bitching and complaining and saying, that you need to do things better instead of trying to pick you up and encourage you in that way. When I look at the defense, I think I see a little bit of that at times, and I think it stems from frustration. And of course, when you're letting up a ton of points, you're going to become frustrated. That is what happens. When you look at leadership and kind of from what you've heard and what you've seen this year, AJ, how much of a concern do you think leadership is? Because you've talked about guys that have stepped up and maybe become leaders. Noah Taylor's a guy that's been thrown around. It's great that he's a leader. He's an experienced guy, but he's only been around the program. He's only been at the university for a few months. You know what I mean? It's different than having a guy that's been in the program for 3 or 4 years, experience that everybody can look to, who's going to pick you up and try to get you going. How big of an issue do you think, maybe not leadership as a whole is, but positive leadership might be on this defense right now when you just look at how much they've struggled so far this year?
Well, as you know, leadership's easy when you're winning.
Oh yeah, very easy.
You don't
have to do as much.
You don't have to have great leadership when you're winning.
Yeah,
leadership becomes far more valuable and important when you're not. Or
when there's adversity. Yeah, mm-hmm.
That's when it comes into play, right? And they need leadership, and the leaders are frustrated, and some of the kids that they're trying to lead don't maybe take the criticism very well. Maybe it's the delivery. Maybe one kid you can call all kinds of names to get them in the right frame of mind, and another kid you can't. So leaders have to figure that out. Leaders cannot try to be more than who they are. Mm-hmm. If you're always negative and everything is negative, then kids might figure that out and say, okay, they understand the message that's coming through. But if you're just a complainer on the field and then it doesn't translate elsewhere, if you're not a teacher off the field, a lot of leaders are teachers. Yeah. They're teachers because of conversations. They're teachers because they lead by example. But if you don't always follow through with what you're telling other guys, they're not going to. I'm not saying that's happening here. No. That makes leadership challenging. Very few people are born leaders. Mm-hmm. And it's really hard to coach leadership. You just kind of have to. I think I talked to a college basketball coach in the ACC now in North Carolina who once told me that, you just have to hope and pray a couple of guys are leaders.
Mm-hmm. It's true.
Kind of figure that they have it in them and that they see the moment, they know when to strike. But if you're always jumping in after every play, again, guys stop hearing you. Mm-hmm. If you're calculated when you say something, then maybe it has more of an impact. Or some kids may say, man, you're not talking up much. You're supposed to be the damn leader and I don't ever hear from you. Mm-hmm. So when things are not going well, people are going to pounce on 1,000 things on the outside, and the kids internally on the inside, they're going to find their little negative comfort zones. And it's really hard to break out of a negative comfort zone. And it's really easy to get into it when the game starts. So they were really good in the first quarter. Boom. Light switch went off, not on, and they went into a funk for 2 quarters. And really would have been the rest of the game. Notre Dame left points on the field, in my opinion. So,
they did. Yeah.
So, I think that's kind of where it is. Noah Taylor is potentially a great leader, but as you said, he just got there. I think this is Cedric Gray's defense, in my opinion. Yeah. I think Cedric is the guy. Cedric is a really smart guy. He's a really good player. He's very, very likable. He's got a lot of the it factor things that you want in an athlete. But one of the things he's learning how to do in his young life is learning how to lead a group that's struggling. So this is his first go around being that guy. So he needs to continue to learn to be that guy, but he needs support. He needs support from others on the field. And really, guys need to be their own individual leaders as well. If you're pretty good at being your own individual leader, then you're easier to be led by your main leader on defense. I know I'm using that word a lot right now, but that's kind of true, and that's where things are.
Yeah.
So again, I'm going to emphasize so much of this is psychological. So much of this is confidence. So much of this is just having some good things happen that allow them to exhale and not be so tight. Because when things go poorly, they get tight. Even my dog agrees with this. If you can hear my dog, my dog says I'm not a very consistent leader. So he's barking right now because of that. So
I think a David Sis podcast, right? AJ.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't want to overdo it. And maybe we've gone a little too far in the leadership thing and the mentality thing, but that's absolutely it. It's a highly talented team. There's a lot of kids on this team that are not playing that well right now that will end up in the NFL. Okay. The staff knows they've got NFL dudes. Some are banged up on the front line. Mm-hmm. Some of them are struggling out on the perimeter. All right. And they've got to get right. If they get healthier and they get this mental fog component kind of washed out of their systems, this should be a pretty solid defense by the end of the year. They are very confident as a staff that they can get the group there. Mm-hmm. But it begins this week. That's why the whole fresh start thing is being pitched a little bit too, because the goal is to win the ACC Coastal, and that begins now because they haven't played an ACC game yet. And they also want them to sort of, don't ignore what we've done through 4 games, but you know what? That doesn't affect that second record in the win-loss column. That's league record. That's what they have moving forward, and they have an opportunity this week to begin that process. And like I said, they have an anemic offense coming in that can help this defense get healthy in a heartbeat.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And like you said, it could be a great opportunity against a Virginia Tech offense that has struggled, which we're going to hit on here in a few minutes. Could be a really good opportunity for them to turn things around this weekend. So AJ, real quickly before we move on to the individual matchup between North Carolina and Virginia Tech, we're going to hit on weather a little bit later too. That's obviously been a big theme of the week. We'll save that for the end because that obviously is a concern with the hurricane coming in. But AJ, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor on this one. They've sponsored the UNC Football Show the whole time since we've started it. You guys know them if you follow along and you watch along. We absolutely love them. And that's myperfectfranchise.net, guys. The job market's so crazy. Prices are going up. We're just living in a world right now that it feels like so many different moving parts, whether it be money, whether it be the job market, the housing market, all that stuff, especially in this area. And I know for me personally, I drive around sometimes and you see these franchises pop up. No matter how the economy's going, all these franchises are popping up everywhere. And I always wonder, how do you do that? And guys, you can do that here with myperfectfranchise.net, and more specifically with Andy Ludica. He's the founder and owner of My Perfect Franchise. And more importantly, he's a long-term Rivals member, diehard college football fan, and he's a franchise veteran, having owned multiple franchises and businesses throughout his career. And what he does using his expertise is he helps others find their American dream through a very thorough and free, keyword free, consultation process. You can go say, hey, Andy, I'm interested in starting my own franchise or opening my own franchise. How do I do that? He'll let you talk to him, kind of talk through the process, give you a little consultation meeting, absolutely free. So guys, call Andy, put your life and career in your own hands. I think right now is a fantastic time to do so, especially if you're a local guy in this area. This is such a booming area in terms of real estate and commercial real estate in the market. So tons of people are going to be coming here. Franchises are just going to continue to pop up everywhere as well. So guys, 100% free. So what do you really have to lose? And let me throw this in here as well, AJ. Massive Mac Brown fan. I have to keep harping on that every time we do this because it's something that kind of is a very unique thing with Mac Brown, obviously being the coach in North Carolina. So if you do end up talking to Andy, which I 100% recommend you should do, make sure you tell him 2 things. Make sure you talk to him about Mac Brown a little bit because I'm sure he'll enjoy that conversation. But also make sure you tell him Tar Heel Illustrated sent you. Again, guys, links below, myperfectfranchise.net. Find your perfect franchise there. Just click the link and that'll take you directly to his website. Big shout out to Andy. Love partner with him, and long may it continue. AJ, let's dive into this matchup a little bit. Again, 3:30 p.m. kickoff in Kenan Stadium. We're going to hit on weather a little bit later, like I mentioned. But I'm going to go ahead and run through some kind of stats on V2, just overall kind of overview of them and how their season's gone 4 games in so far. So currently sitting at 2-2 overall, undefeated in the ACC, a win over Boston College a few weeks back. They're coming off a loss to West Virginia in Blacksburg. Pretty disappointing performance, I think, from a lot of VT fans' perspective. I think they were expecting a lot better of a game than they saw, particularly from the offense, which has been struggling. Under first-year coach Brent Pry, first year, has a lot of VT ties, so a guy that's very familiar with the program and kind of a Virginia Tech guy, which I think is what Virginia Tech should always have and kind of wants in their football program, specifically their head coach. Total defense, AJ, this is a good defense. Make no mistakes about it. Number 10 in the country in total defense, allowing just 256 yards per game. In a lot of ways, they're kind of the opposite of North Carolina. Really good defense. Carolina's got a really good offense, but a struggling offense at Virginia Tech, ranking number 105 in total offense, just gaining 330 yards per game right now. So this is an offense that has struggled this year. More specifically on that defense, Mac Brown kind of hit on this as well. Really good run stop defense, allowing an average of just 86 rushing yards per game so far this year. So a really good team at stopping the run. That's something that Carolina looked good running the ball at times this year, but really struggled against Notre Dame. So that's something that is going to be an interesting matchup to watch going into Saturday. And AJ, another quick note to throw at you that kind of focuses on North Carolina and Virginia Tech. These are the two most penalized teams in the conference right now. Virginia Tech, most penalized team, average of 80 penalty yards per game. North Carolina not too far behind with 72.3 penalty yards per game. So AJ, before we get into keys to victory, what are just your overall thoughts on the Virginia Tech team that's coming into Chapel Hill? Because like we've talked about ad nauseum, I do believe when you look at this offense and how much they've struggled, this could be a really nice opportunity for Carolina to put a positive product on the defensive side of the ball, make some stops, and maybe gain some confidence going into a tough stretch in the ACC.
Anemic offensively. They've really struggled, especially, they've struggled across the board. Grant Wells, their quarterback, if you take out the Wofford game, which is FCS, if you just look at the FBS opponents, he's 55%.
Yeah,
530 yards, 3 touchdowns, 5 interceptions.
I watched some of that West Virginia game, AJ, not to cut you off. And in the stretch that I watched is when they got up by like 20 points. And I'm not even just saying this. It was some of the worst quarterback play that I've seen this year, because I think he threw an interception. I think he had a ball batted down. I think he completed like one pass to Stephen Gosnell in the stretch that I watched. And it was just, he really struggled in that game. So I just wanted to throw that in there as well, because I have seen them a little bit this year as well.
Yeah, Mac talked him up Wednesday, but I went back and looked at his Marshall stats. For his career, he's got 37 touchdowns and 29 interceptions. So
yeah, he's a guy that turns the ball over. Yeah.
He was at Marshall before. When you watch him play, it looks like he could be a pretty good player. And North Carolina, look at what everybody said a week ago about Drew Pine. Look what he did. Sure. Yeah. Carolina's played 4 teams this year. 3 of those quarterbacks set career highs against them. So, Granger didn't have one. Granger had bigger games from Georgia State last year. But Chase Bryce had a career high. Drew Pine had a career high. So the kid from Florida or Florida A&M has had a career high to that point. He's since had a couple of games where he's thrown for even more, but those are against FCS teams. As much as we're saying that Carolina can get well defensively against Virginia Tech, we could say that Virginia Tech can get well offensively.
Yeah, that's Carolina. A good point. Yeah,
so
that's a good point.
Something has to give there, and really on the other side of the ball. These two teams are, if they were a puzzle, they'd fit perfectly.
Oh, yeah.
Because Carolina's been really good offensively and terrible defensively, and Tech's been really good defensively and terrible offensively. So this game like that, really, who can enforce their will? Virginia Tech has a win over Boston College, who I don't think is very good this year. I think they're a little bit of a disappointment in the league. I thought they'd be a little bit better. Tech has a win over Wofford, but they weren't impressive. And then they have the terrible performance against West Virginia and a really bad performance against Old Dominion. I think Carolina's a better football team, but that doesn't mean they're going to win this game. Mm-hmm. Especially with the defense they have. Again, if Grant Wells throws for 350 yards and 4 touchdowns, Tar Heels are in trouble. Yeah. If Virginia Tech, which has got they got a pretty good offensive line, I think. They got a lot of the guys back from last year. They have a couple of Keyshawn King. They have a couple of guys that are pretty good runners. They're explosive and they can get through a hole. If Carolina doesn't defend the run and they don't fit their gaps, then they're going to turn a lot of people into 100-yard rushers. So I think this game comes down to Carolina handling their responsibilities on defense. If they do and they tackle well, then I think they'll win this game, because I do think that Drake's going to score. Drake's going to lead into some points.
Oh, yeah.
They're going to score more against Virginia Tech than most everybody else has. In fact, they may be more than everybody else has. I think the Mountaineers have the most at 33. So that's the thing. I think if Carolina can slow the Hokies and not let them get too well, Tar Heels should win this game. But man, your guess is as good as mine right now. You know how I look at these games, Jacob. The season is a book, and each game is a chapter. And I'm really, really excited about getting into this next chapter and seeing what it reveals about this team, because they've had the player-only meeting. They had the passionate coach who showed a lot more zeal Monday than he normally does. We had Chizik being pretty open and honest, using the word disconnect. We had Reva Hossack talking about some guys' attitudes and all that, and focus. And we had Storm Duck Tuesday talk about focus. And then Max said they've had a pretty good week of practice, and they've got a team coming in that they should beat. They should be able to look better than they have in the areas they haven't looked good in. Mm-hmm. So we'll see if that happens or not. If it doesn't, then we're going to have a very interesting conversation next week. If it does, then it's certainly something to build on. I think this program, I think this team, I think this coaching staff, and I think this fan base desperately need a win, and they need a solid showing. I think one of the things that some people might not understand that are concerned about the way the fans reacted to the Notre Dame loss is, I don't think that was just a reaction to losing Notre Dame. I think that was a reaction to the way they played through 4 games. Mm-hmm. And hey, we thought this defense simplification, all these athletes, dudes was going to be a lot better. And it hasn't been. But if they show some of those signs this week, I think they'll temper some of the anxiety among the fan base. And certainly by the staff another week, they'll go down to a challenge at Miami, which anything can happen. Who knows what the hell kind of team they're going to see down there, and go from there. But they have to show progress this week. They have to. Yeah. They have to show progress, because I think another thing that, in my personal opinion, I don't have any inside knowledge on this at all. My personal opinion is I think, Mac likes to kind of control the narrative. And when the criticism is going out there and people don't know everything that's going on, and they kind of get uber focused on something, then you can't control the narrative as much. If they're able to have a good performance, it allows him to control the narrative a little bit more. It pulls people back from poking at some of the areas that make an entire program uncomfortable. And I think that the program's a little uncomfortable this week, and understandably so. And I think the fan base is really uncomfortable too, and understandably so. So this is a wonderful opportunity for them this week to get some things right and build some momentum in the direction in the ACC, which is ultimately the most important thing for this program. Because as I've said for a couple of days now, and the column says it as well, and I said this in our Twitter space the other night, I don't think it's fair to judge North Carolina football against Notre Dame, because they don't live in that district. They're on the other side of town. Notre Dame's in a mansion. They're in Mansion Avenue. Carolina's in a nice community on their side of town. They're not ready to get into that district yet. Mm-hmm. So judge them against their peer programs. Judge them against the Hokies, the Hurricanes, the Blue Devils, the Cavaliers, the Yellow Jackets, the Panthers, the Demon Deacons, the Wolfpack, et cetera, except Clemson. Mm-hmm. Judge them against everybody in the ACC except Clemson. That's the best way to gauge what kind of progress the program is making. That's Agreed. The way people should look at the rest of the season.
Agreed. Real quickly, keys to victory, AJ. For me, it's get after Grant Wells, tied for the league with 5, in the league for most interceptions with 5. And Virginia Tech's the 3rd worst passing team in the ACC. You can get a little pressure on him, make him feel uncomfortable. You expect him to turn the ball over, especially when you look at what the weather is going to look like this weekend. And again, I think it's stopping the run. Virginia Tech's 2nd worst rushing team in the ACC right now, averaging just 112 yards per game. So this is an opportunity for the defense. I think, again, it's got to be with the defense. I agree with you. I think Carolina will put up points. I think it's a good Virginia Tech defense, no doubt about it. But Carolina's shown they can put up points. Again, the weather, depending on what happens, that could negatively affect North Carolina. If it's a really, really rainy and wet day and Drake May maybe isn't as comfortable in the pocket throwing the ball and you've got to run a little bit more, that could feed into Virginia Tech's hands. But on the other side of the ball, if Virginia Tech is forced to run more with you, when you look at how bad they've been running the ball this year, that could potentially play into Carolina's hands, although Carolina's not really shown a great ability at stopping the run this year. So those are my 2 keys to victory. What are the keys to victory for you, AJ? And I'm sure you agree with those, but any other ones you want to throw in there?
Stop the run and make Grant Wells beat you with his arm, regardless of what the weather conditions are. Mm-hmm. I think that's a winning formula. And on the other side of the ball, they have to run the ball pretty well in the early downs. We talked about that last week. We wrote a piece about it. That came up again this week in the press conferences. Carolina has run the ball 112 times on first and second down. 64 of those runs are going for 3 yards or less. Mm-hmm. They had 18 first and second down runs against Notre Dame at 24 yards. Now, there were a few sacks thrown in there, skew the numbers a little bit, but even if you remove those, the numbers are not good. They have to be able to run the ball well enough to allow more of the offensive bag to be used. Mm-hmm. And don't force them to be in positions to have to go for it on fourth down a lot as well. That's the other thing too. A lot of times, they're going for it on fourth downs because there's defense can get stops. Field goals aren't going to win games. So the offense has to get touchdowns. So don't put yourself in fourth down situations. Get those first downs, move the chains, get down the field, and score touchdowns. Mm-hmm. Because until the defense starts to bow up, field goals are not going to win for this team. They have to score touchdowns.
Definitely. Prediction time, AJ. I had to go look at mine because I forgot what I sent in because I sent it a couple of days ago. I'm saying 31-27 North Carolina. I think it's going to be, for a North Carolina game this year, I should preface, relatively low scoring. I do think the weather is going to play a big factor. I know it's still kind of up in the air on what kind of weather is going to be in Chapel Hill, but I can guarantee you 2 things on Saturday. It's going to be windy and it's going to be wet, regardless if it's pouring down or just a light drizzle like Mac Brown said. From what I've seen so far, it looks like it's going to be a pretty heavy rain day and a high wind, very similar to what we saw back in 2016. I'm sure that's a game you covered as well when Carolina really struggled. Yeah. But that's my prediction. I think Carolina wins this one. I think they should win this one. When you look at how Virginia Tech struggled, and like I said, there's so few unknowns in my head though, in terms of that weather and how that could play a factor. A little bit less rain, I have a little bit more confidence in Carolina winning this game, maybe a little bit more comfortably, because I think they'll have a more ability to pass if it's not as wet out there. But if it's a really wet day, really rainy day, it's going to be turned into this kind of a run fest. And then I think it's a little bit more up in the air based on what we've seen, not only from Carolina's defense, but just at how good Virginia Tech's been defensively as well. So what's your score prediction there, AJ?
Yeah, the field will be fine. The field is turf, they have a great drainage system underneath the field. So the field itself will be fine. It's the wind, I think, that'll be the biggest problem. And so it depends. If it's just raining hard, I think they'll be okay. If it's windy and rain, lots of torrential rain like they had in that game in 2016, then I think Carolina's looking at like a 20-13 type win.
Yeah, really low score.
If it's not that windy and the elements really don't affect either team's ability just to play football, then I think Carolina's looking at something like 34-24. Mm-hmm. So the defense isn't going to shut them down, but Virginia Tech's offense just looks so bad. It's hard for me. Yeah. It's hard. They have looked worse in some ways than Carolina's defense has looked.
That's saying a lot to you.
Yeah. So, and I know Virginia Tech fans, that if any of them are paying attention to this, just think about what you've seen offensively and imagine that on the defensive side of the ball in the reverse. That's what Carolina's look like. So that to me is going to be a more interesting matchup than good on good. Mm-hmm. It's bad on bad because
who can play better.
Carolina's going to be good enough, but what breaks on the bad on bad? Who's still really bad? And as a result, is that other team's bad actually pretty good? That's the team that wins this game.
Yeah. AJ, we'll see what happens on Saturday. We'll see what happens weather-wise. Keep it locked to TarTaleIllustrated.com for, we're not Chris Homan over here with meteorologist updates, but if the game is to change because of inclement weather, which we don't expect to happen right now, keep it locked. We'll have it first reported over at TarTaleIllustrated.com, and obviously keep it locked to TarTaleIllustrated.com for all your pregame coverage leading up to Saturday's 3:30 p.m. kickoff in Kenan Stadium. Again, that game will be on ACC Network. I've been Jacob Turner. He's been Andrew Jones for another episode of the UNC Football Show. Enjoyed it, AJ. A lot to talk about in this one. I know we maybe went a little bit longer than usual, but I really do think we needed to focus a little bit more on the defense and their struggles because I know that's a big concern, a major talking point amongst Carolina fans right now. So let's do this. If you think Carolina's going to win the game, go ahead and hit the thumbs up below. Give this video a like. If you think they're going to start off 1-0 in the conference and beat Virginia Tech on Saturday. And yeah, guys, looking forward to it. Again, I'm Jacob Turner. He's been Andrew Jones. We appreciate you watching. Make sure you check out myperfectfranchise.net. Link is in the description below. Like, share, and subscribe. Hit the notification bell as well so you know every single time we upload. We'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks.